Our final speaker for this session and for the symposium is Pamela Long, a renowned independent scholar of late medieval and Renaissance science and technology, who has an amazing array of publications that I've long admired and many of us know very well, including from 2001, Openness, Secrecy, Authorship, Technical Arts, and the Culture of Knowledge, from Antiquity to the Renaissance, and more recently in 2011, Artisan Practitioners and the Rise of the New Sciences, 1800 to 1600, as well as books and projects on early modern Rome and work on Leonardo da Vinci. And today she will be speaking to us about Leonardo and his observational mechanics.
Thank you very much. This is just a wonderful symposium. So thank you, Ellie, and everyone for organizing it. So I'll start right in. Leonardo da Vinci's Madrid Codex I is one of a pair of manuscript codices which were miscatalogued in the Biblioteca Nacional of Madrid and were then rediscovered in 1965. Madrid I consists of basically two notebooks that it was argued by Ladislao Reti were bound together by Leonardo himself. I have not yet, I have to say right off, I have not seen the manuscript, but which I do plan to do. But there's plenty of work to be done on by using the two facsimiles that exist. The first by Ladislao Reti, published in 1974, and the recent one published in 2018 by Dietrich Lohrmann and Thomas Krepp, and both include facsimiles, and the Lohrmann and Krepp have, so let me see you see the one by Reti, and then on your left, you see Lohrmann and Krepp, and they've very helpfully reversed the page. And they've also very helpfully numbered both the paragraphs and the diagrams. Although I worked for a long time with the Reti, this was just a wonderful gift because the Reti is very confusing. He tries to do it backwards in both the transcription and English translation, and it just becomes very confusing. Anyway, so this was very, very nice and very helpful. And the Lohrmann and Krepp also includes a commentary. Now, Ladislao Reti suggested, and I agree, that Leonardo created the Codex himself and intended it to be a single coherent work. In the first half, through folio 92, that is through the first 6 quires, the folios follow the progress in normal fashion from left to right. And in the upper right-hand corner, you see folio 44. No, wait a minute. I mean, in the upper right-hand corner, you see the folio 45R, and the left-hand folio is 44B, just like a normal manuscript. And it's the writing, of course, is in Leonardo's characteristic mirror script, the foliation on the upper right. And this part consists of a track on the elements of machines. This section is filled with beautiful drawings of machines and devices and machine parts, surrounded by textual discussion concerning how they work. It treats the motions of toothed wheels, springs, clock escapement mechanisms, which Leonardo calls tempi, continuous and discontinuous motions of various sorts, counterweights, chain gears, screws, pinions and wheels, endless screws, lifting devices, mills, keys and locks, and crossbows, among many other things. This material comes out of Leonardo's studies of motion, but is also grounded in his practices as an engineer. There is evidence that Leonardo carefully planned the treatise. It has been noted that the drawings were made first by creating preparatory drawings with metal or bone points before ink was applied, leaving prick holes which are not visible in the facsimiles, but which I've read and believe are visible in the actual manuscript. Other evidence of careful preparation includes sheets in the Codex Atlanticus, which is, as I'm sure you know, a compilation of various sheets from various notebooks in Milan that contain certain drawings that are repeated in Madrid 1. In Codex Atlanticus, there are also blocks of text crossed out that then are carefully written into back into Madrid 1. And as is pointed out by Lorman and Krepp, some of the passages of Madrid 1 are also crossed out, presumably to be put in another notebook, which they suggest is Leonardo's lost book on mechanics. It is also clear in many cases that Leonardo drew the images first and then wrote around them. And you can see that on this page here. Many of the sheets function more or less as self-contained units on a single topic, or sometimes on two or more related topics. The second half of the work progresses backwards from the back of the treatise towards the center, from right to left, with Leonardo's foliation numbers on the upper left corner of the verso. So this section includes more theoretical discussion on what is now called the medieval science of weights, the Scientia de Ponderibus, although this isn't strictly the case because he typically runs out of paper in the first section, so he puts some practical things in the second section as well. But all the sheets of both halves are the same size, all bear the same recurring watermark, and the whole consists of, it is contained by two protective fly leaves. And you see here is, so he's going backwards. And so this is folio 2R, but it's on where the verso should be. And the 2 is written backwards because he writes backwards. So I begin with a brief discussion of an example from the second, more theoretical part of the Codex first, just to give a sense. And I'm sort of at the beginning of this project. Although, I mean, in one way I've worked on Leonardo forever, but on another way I'm just starting. So I don't know. But I just want to give a sense of what the folios are like and what Leonardo seems to be doing and the kinds of questions I will be asking. And I want to mention that Ellie Truitt and I are planning to write an article together about this second part of this sort of complicated second part of the treatise, which is not studied that much, and its relationship to other manuscripts that Leonardo was looking at. And this is when each of us finish our respective some other work that we're doing. But here is, you see that this folio 190R over here is put on by a later person. So that's deceiving. So if you work sequentially from the front of the book, and the front of the book is actually the back of the book, but so you get to folio 1B, if you think the way Leonardo did. So the front of the book is really the back of the book, and we're starting at the front of the book, which is actually the back of the book. And as you can see, Leonardo has a series of paragraphs, each with a heading. So Regula, it's hard to do this from here. Peso, I believe that's Regula, Moto is down here, and Forza. So I'm just going to read you a couple of these little paragraphs, starting with this one. Regula, I establish the center line and define it to be that one extended from the center of the gravity of the suspended or resting bodies to the universal center of the gravity of the world. That's what I'm obviously translating, but very literal translation. Peso, a body suspended in the air with cords, or one which is supported from under with beams, which are placed with their ends under or over perfect planes at various sites, weighs with so much more heaviness on one of the supports as on the other, to the degree that the attachment of one is closer to the center line, to the perpendicular of the center, to the axis of the weight. Leonardo was, so you see that what I just read, so that weight here, this is a heavier weight. What he's trying to say, that then it's weighing on the sides. And then just to give one more, the natural accidental course of light bodies which do not prepare before themselves flying waves of air, which do not prepare before themselves flying waves of air, do not cause impetus. To the contrary, they will make varying motions as one sees in the fall of a thick paper. So you see, like that's what he's saying. Leonardo is here putting together different ideas about weight and motion, and he's looking at one or more texts, probably including texts by the early 13th century mathematician Jordanus de Nemore. And there's a lot of discussion about who Jordanus is, but the relevant tracts by Jordanus are two. First, the Elements on the Demonstration of Weights, Elementa Jordani Super Demonstrationem Ponderum. And this tract is extant in a number of manuscripts, one of which is in Florence and one in the Vatican, and several in England and one in Erfurt. The second of Jordanus de Nemore is a later work, the book on the theory of weight, Liber de Ratione Ponderibus. And René Dugas a long time ago noted that, just to sort of give you a sense of Jordanus of Nemore, he noted that the essential originality of Jordanus lay in the systematic use in his study of the motion of heavy bodies of the effective path in a vertical direction as a measure of the effect of a weight, which was usually placed at the end of a lever and described as a circle in consequence. And that's sort of what the second phrase says. Now, Jordanus's Elements on the Demonstration of Weight begins with a list of 7 axioms or definitions, followed by 7 propositions. The first of the axioms is, the motion of every weight is toward the center of the world. The same regula with which Leonardo begins folio 1b. I establish the center line and define it to be that one extended from the center of gravity of the suspended or resting bodies to the universal center of the gravity of the world. Now, assuming, and I don't necessarily want to assume at this point, but assuming that Leonardo is looking at one of Jordanus's manuscripts on this particular moment on this subject at this point, and that it's this line which he's looking at, I would say that this is a kind of translation. Leonardo is more concrete. He mentions himself, I, and also not just the weight of a not just the weight, but suspended or resting bodies. The work to be done here, I think it's a very long, complicated work actually, is to look at the extant manuscripts of Jordanus and others and establish if possible which ones Leonardo was looking at, and to see how both the statements and the diagrams compare one to the other. Now I want to continue with folio 15b from the first part of the treatise. So we're moving to the first part of the treatise. So now we're going from, from left to right. And this is a folio on which treats of pinions and wheels. So he starts with De Roca e Rota, right up here. There. And to just refresh your gear terminology in case you've forgotten, a pinion is a round gear and usually refers to the smaller part of 2 meshed gears. So both the drawings and the textual explication allow analysis of individual mechanisms and motions and of comparisons among them. Leonardo begins with a statement that concerns the construction of the devices. So up at the top here, up here, he says, if I'm obviously translating it, if the pinion must move the wheel, the spacing of the pinion's teeth must be wider than those of the wheel's teeth. And if the wheel turned the pinion, the opposite should be made. However, if both were well constructed, having equal teeth and spacing would be satisfactory. Now, the text accompanying individual figures concerns the relationship of the structure of the gears to the direction of motion. So the top right, which is right here, you have two spur gears driven by a weight. You see the weight there. Leonardo writes that if you turn one of the wheels in one direction, the other will turn in the opposite direction. So he says, if the pinion must move the wheel, the space of the pinion's teeth must be wider than those of the wheel's teeth. And if the wheel turns the pinion, the opposite should be and spacing would, oh, no, wait, sorry. If you have two wheels that turn each other with their teeth, if they touch at the outside, they will turn contrary-wise to each other. That's the one, and that's referring to this one up here. And so what all he's saying here, that's what he's saying. For the next figure depicting three interlocking gears, spur gears, which is this one. He notes that if you want two wheels to go in the same direction, it must have motion of the third degree. That is, it must have an additional gear in the center, as he has shown. That's what he's saying. Then at the bottom right here, he shows three spur gears of he shows, oh no, the next variation is a weight-driven rack turning a spur gear. That's here. And then at the bottom right, he shows three spur gears of diminishing sizes encased in what would be called, I think, an internal spur gear. He writes, regardless of the direction you turn wheel D, A and B will turn the same way, and wheel C will turn the opposite direction. The same thing will happen turning a wheel A and B, but if you turn wheel C, every other wheel will turn in the opposite direction. Okay, and I couldn't make a model of that. That was beyond me. So he shows some variations of two gears turning each other. For example, on the bottom, in the bottom middle, he shows, as you can see, a crown gear turning a lantern gear or vice versa. And at the top three on the left are different kinds of gears moving one another. Finally, the fourth down on the left is a small spur gear rotating inside, right here, inside an internal spur gear. There are in all 5 examples, and concerning all of them, Leonardo says, if you have two wheels that turn each other with their teeth, if they touch at the outside, they will turn contrary-wise to each other. And that's the 4 examples I just mentioned. But if one of the wheels turns the inside of the other wheel with its outside, both wheels will then turn in the same direction, regardless of which wheel causes the motion. Leonardo thus devises a number of different variations and studies the differences that these variations make in the direction of motion. He's interested in both structural variations and different kinds of pinions and gears, and in the local motion that result from these variations. These issues have practical manifestations for real machinery, but Leonardo is also interested in the study of motion itself in all its small local manifestations. These drawings, some of which must have been drawings of actual working gears that he had constructed or that he had seen, can be thought of as observational tools. I would suggest that Leonardo perhaps has looked at pseudo-Aristotelian mechanical questions, which drew much attention from humanists in the 15th century, and had been copied a number of times. This text was written in the 1490s and had been copied a number of times by the 1490s, and was printed for the first time by the Aldine Press, along with the rest of the Aristotelian corpus around between 1495 and 1498. The problem is that it's a Greek text and was not translated into Latin until the 16th century. And yeah, it's important that, and Leonardo definitely did not read Greek, but it's important that in the Sforza court in Milan, he was part of a trading zone. He had much communication with learned humanists, and as Monica Azzolini has shown, even participated in at least one learned disputation along with Luca Pacioli, the mathematician. And in addition, there was a studio or University of Milan, which was located in Pavia, but Ludovico Sforza also maintained a separate school in Milan itself for rhetoric, poetry, and Greek. That's important, Greek and mathematics. So although Leonardo couldn't read Greek, it would be highly surprising if he didn't know about something about this pseudo Aristotelian mechanics. And the Aristotelian mechanical questions begins with an encomium to the circle. And then there's a paragraph about the characteristics of the circle. And I'm not going to go into that, partly because I don't have time, but partly because I don't completely understand it. So passing that on by, the illustrations of the pseudo-Aristotelian mechanical questions didn't come down with the original manuscript, but the description of the movement of circles is very precise, so that later editors could easily reconstruct them. And this is the diagram that you see in many editions of the first diagram. It's easy to recreate, and the editors have often done so. Aristotle says that he shows the same, he goes on to explain that if you have three circles together and you move one in one direction, the middle one will move in one direction, and the two outer ones will move in the opposite direction. And he says, this is, he says, this is, and Aristotle, pseudo-Aristotle says, this is just like the wheels of bronze and steel that they dedicate at temples. Craftsmen, pseudo-Aristotle goes on to say, craftsmen make such an instrument concealing the original circle so that the marble of the machine is alone apparent, which while its cause is invisible. Aristotle's example is exactly the one, as you can see, used by Leonardo on the gear page that we have seen. Yet this is the little time when the audience becomes hypnotized, you see, for the end of the conference. Yeah, unlike for pseudo-Aristotle, many of his 16th century commentators, and many of his 16th century commentators, for Leonardo, the study of motion involves also a practice of construction, observation, and explanation involving visual images and probably actual gears. In Madrid 1, he describes hundreds of minute local motions of not only gears, but all kinds of other mechanical motions of numerous machine elements and their variations, of which this gear page is just one example. We know that Leonardo was extensively involved with actual engineering projects such as canal building and large-scale bronze casting and all kinds of other projects. And we know that he hired German artisans to help him. Mostly he hired ironsmiths, and we know that because he complains about them constantly. Moreover, he frequently refers to his own experience. So while the mechanical questions refers to actual mechanisms in temple, the pseudo-Aristotelian mechanical question, refers to actual mechanisms in temples, which are familiar to people at that time, I assume, and illustrate the tricks of craftsmen, Leonardo is really doing something different. The gear folio, albeit representing only a small fraction of the hundreds of devices and elements and machines treated in Madrid 1, provide a window into his interests and methods. First, he explores specific kinds of mechanisms and devices. Leonardo uses both textual explanation and visual images in his investigations. Both are essential and they are on par with one another, I think, usually. In most cases here and throughout the codex, neither the text nor the image is fully understandable without the other. Leonardo, and in fact, I haven't understood some pages until I made the model, and then I made a model and oh, I see exactly what, because his Italian is quite dense, you know, and there's a sense in which he didn't quite have a vocabulary to precisely talk about what he wanted to talk about. So Leonardo's experiments on paper with, Leonardo experiments on paper with many specific variations. Certainly in at least some instances, he also constructs actual devices, but even on paper, he creates structural variations. Of course, he was a brilliant draftsman, so he could draw anything he wanted. And he describes in details the ways in which direction of motion and facility of functioning are affected by variations in structure. Leonardo's interest in issues of friction and facility of motion are indications that while philosophical issues such as the nature of motion fascinate him, he has one foot firmly planted within the arena of engineering practice, but also I would suggest such issues are part of the philosophical issues that Leonardo wants to explore. Like I'm trying to say, I'm not sure I want to say this, but I'll say it anyway. But I think he's trying to make practical mechanics philosophical in a sense. The whole of Madrid 1 is itself constitutes a kind of investigation. Rather than presenting the results of research, it is the research. This is the case because for Leonardo, drawing and writing taken together constitute not only the tools of investigation, but the investigation itself. As Paolo Galluzzi has emphasized, Leonardo highlights the direct relationship between the material structure of a thing and the operation it performs. He devises a number of different variations as images on paper and thinks about the ways that these variations influence direction and ease of motion. Leonardo's devices function on some level as observational tools. He constructs various devices, then he observes and describes how they move, in what direction and how easily. He's interested in both structural variations of different kinds of devices and in the local motions that result from these variations. Such variables have profound practical manifestations. Leonardo is also interested in them as part of his general study of motion, a study which is local and observational, which sometimes must have involved making models, and which uses the creation of visual images as a way of both thinking about and explicating variations. He is translating the previous tradition, including the pseudo-Aristotelian mechanical questions, as well as Jordanus de Nemore and others, into something quite different.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for that wonderful, I think our internal gears are turning, hopefully still at this late hour, but we have a few minutes for questions. So could I ask our two speakers, Vivek and Pamela, to please take a seat, and we've got already some hands up. So please wait for Lynn to pass you the microphone.
Thank you both very much. Vivek, could you just clarify the connection between Mamluk Cairo and Sultanate India, how the Jaziri manuscript, the Arabic might have gotten to India? And I have another point.
Yeah. So that was conjecture, but no, I mean, but it's important conjecture actually, because we have a 1466 report that that reports gifts
Yes.
from El Mustanjid. And this is, it showed up in Malika Dakshish's work on epistolary connections between Mamluk Cairo and Mandu. But it also, I found it in a history. So I was able to corroborate it. Now, what's really interesting, actually, and I go into it a lot in the book chapter, and I wasn't able to cover it here. What's really important is that the sultanates are also commissioning madrasas in the Hijaz. They really have their claws quite heavily sunk in that region. And there's lots of flow of things between the two regions. I wanted to cite that one case because it is a good example of where there's no Persian intermediary, because
That's what I was interested in.
Yes,
the
there could-
intermediary.
because that's the automatic assumption.
Gotcha.
The assumption is that, oh, obviously, like they would have come through something
Right.
through Iran or even elsewhere. But I have to say that the way that the pages are laid out suggests a Mamluk model. The later Persian, so there are maybe 2 or 3 Persian models made, like, attributed to Iran that are and one of them that Donald Hill bases his translation on. They show very different page layouts than the one that I attribute to Mandu.
So in this case, you see more direct connection.
Yes.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. This question is for Pamela Long. I'm just looking at the page. It's apparent to me, I'm sure it's apparent to you, that the images were put down first and the text accommodates the placement of the images. So that this leads to the recognition that he puts the images down first, the text follows. And I'm wondering if you would agree that for him, maybe the image is primary and he's finding a passage or an observation from other texts that is fitting for the image. That's just something I'm throwing out there. Or do you think he already had in mind what text he wanted to go on the page? But I'm just saying in terms of what went on the paper first, I can tell the images went first. So does this reflect an epistemological hierarchy as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, okay, I think that's an interesting question. I think, well, we can tell he put the images on first in many of the pages in the first half, because you can see the writing carefully written around it. So, but I think that what he did in the front of the book, which is the back of the book, is very different from what he did in the back of the book, which is actually the front of the book. And so this is, I mean, I think in the back of the book, he is looking at other texts, and the task is to find them, which I think can be done, and look at, I plan to go around and look at manuscripts that are in Italy at that time and see what he's looking at. And I think he's looking at other texts and writing down from other texts. And I read you one from Giordano's De Memori, but it doesn't map on exactly as you go down the line. So he's looking at different texts. And then I think he's either copying diagrams or making diagrams himself that seem to be, that are relevant for that text that he's just copied down. In the front of the book, I do not believe he's copying text from anywhere. I believe that he is, I think these are his own words, and that and you can just tell that he's speaking to all these variations that you don't really find in the traditions that he's working with. And that he's very much interested in the visual material, but you wouldn't understand the point of what he was saying if you just had the image. So I do believe, I mean, it's easy to assume that, well, Leonardo, so the visual image would be primary, but I think that they actually usually function more or less equally back and forth, not as the visual, as primarily the visual. I mean, just the way he constructed it is one thing, but I don't think he constructed pages of visual images and then went back. I think he was thinking about gears here, and he's looking at gears, and maybe he's made some gears, and I think he's testing them, because it just seems the way he records every tiny motion, and he's writing down what it is right at that time. So that's what I imagine that he's doing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you, for these incredible talks. I have a quick kind of question for each of you. Vivek, is it possible that the use of similar pigmentation to show the Indian mahout and the elephant is significant to, again, have that close link of like to show this kinship essentially between them? That's my first question for you. And then for Pamela, in terms of the kinds of books that he's looking at, the kinds of, and thinking about these gears, to me, this just seems so similar to Volvels, right? So manuscripts that have moving parts in them made of parchment or paper that can be used to kind of demonstrate and show the movement of the spheres in kind of more complicated ways. So anyway, is that possible for both of you?
So I mean, I just think that the metonym is just so powerful on its own, that when it was suggested quite recently that, oh, the Indian is obviously here and racialized because of the slaves, my initial response was, no, it's an elephant. I mean, the elephant, for the elephant water clock to work, it has to have they just go hand in hand. And that for me is a powerful and persuasive image, and that's what makes it work. That's why it's a functional attribute. The Indianness is part of the functional attribute of the clock. I would agree with that if it were always the case. But yeah.
And I would say yes, and that's part of what you and I are going to be doing. Yes. We're going to have nice trips to, Pavia. And,
Who's first?
Sorry, tell me where to go.
I don't know who is first between the two. Eric, okay.
Okay, I have a question for Vivek, and it was such a beautiful set of images you brought together from like 2,000 years almost. Sorry, I'm trying to. And I guess my question is about racialization, because your invocation of Heng, racialization can mean different things at different times and places. And I was totally convinced that there is a racialization going on here that links India with a certain type of pigmentation. But it seemed like the next step was linking that with causing fright and a sense of dark and foreboding. And I wonder how much of that is the political aesthetic regime of like the LAPD and not Al Jazari.
So this is a long-standing thing within also European manuscripts, darkness and the devil, darkness, and in Indic iconography, it's darkness and Shani or Saturn, Zuhal. So you have darkness and first of all, the word Hindu in also means dark. It also means black in Arabic. So that's important. So there is already that, and to get to the affective fright, which is what you're asking me about. Yes, this is where the art historian uses their imagination to some extent, but also there are programmatic things, aesthetic reasons why Blackness means right in this manuscript culture. So.
Any further questions? Shireen, yeah?
Thank you so much for this panel. And just to continue Eric's question, I thought that you did such a good job, Vivek, of showing that, you know, the Indian is simultaneously the object of knowledge and the expert. And I just wondered, for the Shadi Abadi version of the Mahout, this kind of depiction of, I thought it was wonderful that you showed the Ellora statue and you mentioned Shirazi's, you know, whole thing about it, experience of wonder in that setting. But I'm just curious, is that a temporal estrangement? Would he have seen people around him, Shadi Abadi, in Mandu wearing top knots and seen them as respected men? Or is this an aesthetic that is associated with the past, with the ancient Indian sages?
Don't really have to go so far in South Asia to encounter a temple with this kind of iconography. If he traversed the water and came and landed, and no, he actually didn't. He was born there. Sorry. Yeah. So if he was born there, he would have encountered temple. This is sort of
No, but sorry, my question would it also feel contemporary, or would this iconography be associated with antiquity?
I think in this case, based on what I'm seeing, I see it as a classicizing pastness, because this is not 16th century sculpture that he's evoking. He's really, the Lakshanas of the Buddha. The Buddha is not really in vogue. Like that kind of sculpture is not in vogue. It is a temporal distance that's being set up. But again, a topic that's really quite, it has a lot of currency for me, is thinking about the depiction of these kinds of sculptures in Persian and Arabic manuscripts more broadly. The work really hasn't been done, and we have a lot of accounts of them from the from around the 11th, 12th century until the early modernity. So you have a lot of these examples, and it's something that I'm trying to do, is something that I'm interested in, and it certainly has a lot of variation. I think actually Sheila Canby has an article, a really old article on the Buddha Shakyamuni illustration, representation in Islamic manuscripts. Really old article, but still a start to this conversation.
I think we're running short on time, so we're going to end the questions there, and in fact end our symposium. It's been an extraordinary few days of very rich discussions, amazingly wide-ranging in terms of geography and chronology, but also amazing in having a kind of cohesion in terms of the questions and the conversations, and the kind of energy, intellectual energy, that I think is also partly a reflection of, for many of us, being back in person in a conference, although we also say hello to the many people who have been following online. I want to also just thank our speakers profoundly for having joined us in Philadelphia and reinvigorating our tradition of our annual symposium. Of course, the previous two were online only. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts, all of us at SIMS and at the Kislak Center and at the library here. And before we go, we traditionally at the end of the symposium announce the theme of next year's symposium. So it falls to me to do that. And the symposium is tentatively scheduled for November 16th to 18th, 2023. Entitled The Image of the Book, Representing the Codex from Antiquity to the Digital Present. And this symposium will focus on how books are reimagined as images, visually, metaphorically, and even cinematographically. So look forward to that. Please keep in touch with us at SIMS if you're interested if you've enjoyed the conference. You can keep up with us by signing up for our newsletter, monthly newsletter, and attending some of our programs. We have online talks, monthly online lectures. We have, if you really love it here, you can drop in virtually every week for coffee with a Codex with the wonderful Dot Porter, who's been in the background monitoring the chat on Zoom the whole time. And of course, we don't typically publish proceedings of our symposia, but we do publish a journal, Manuscript Studies, which I have the great pleasure of co-editing with Lynn, also with Amy Hutchins, who's our reviews editor. So please, if you are looking to publish some of the amazing research you've presented here, please think of submitting to Manuscript Studies. We publish twice a year in print and online. And we also publish reviews. So if you have a book that you'd like to see reviewed, or indeed if you'd like to review a book yourself, please do get in touch with us. Finally, I want to thank all of my colleagues at SIMS. I think I mentioned Dot, Amy already, and also at KISLAC, John Pollock and Eric Dillologe, who've been helping with some of the background things, and Alita Arthurs as well in our events office. But most of all, we have to thank Lynn, because Lynn is the ringleader of this conference. And without her, none of this would be possible. So thank you so much, Lynn. And thank you for always being such a great ringleader for these events. Thank you so much. And speaking of good ingredients, we have a lovely reception, and we still have the manuscripts on view. Please